Well, how we got involved, so out of the blue I get an email saying we're doing a project involving animating jazz and we would like it to be about DNA, and I thought, well, that's pretty much the most insane thing that I've ever heard. So yeah, of course I was enormously excited without having any idea of what would happen as a result of that. But then we met up here, and I think I lectured you for about 3 hours straight, in which I described about 4 billion years worth of evolution pretty fast. It was a sort of degree level lecture, and then you guys just sort of absorbed as much of that waffle as possible and took it away to understand why DNA is the sort of central theme behind all living things that have ever existed, right?
Yeah.
And then what did you do?
Well, I guess the whole process of understanding that information could then just be directly translated to an artistic one. So by trying to understand and unravel what you were saying, which was put in a very good way to understand straight away, I started trying to pick out themes that you've been talking about, that even just words that you kept mentioning over and again, and trying to write some music that represented it rather than copied it, but just that had the same feeling that gave me. I guess what interests me so much about the whole thing is that it is such a general thing, DNA, and it's in everything, but at the same time it's an incredibly specific part of science. So I wanted to write something that had this effect of being utterly infinite and never ending, but actually was very specific and detailed. And I guess we tried to figure out some kind of plan for the gig.
I think we were really inspired when we first met Adam, because we went for a drink afterwards, and it was really amazing because Adam, he gives like really good examples. And I think we were quite daunted by the fact that we had to produce a performance based on DNA migration, and neither of us really knows anything about biology at all. And but we sort of took the idea of DNA being a pattern, and obviously that works well with both animation and music. And I think hopefully it should be pretty good.
I mean, there are parallels, aren't there, between the way, especially jazz, the way that DNA mutates and changes and evolves, and you get different branching events, which means that one species turns into two, and that's a bit. I don't know jazz.
No, definitely. I think the idea that you have, for example, in jazz, you have some written material or some pre-thought out, composed material that is then interpreted and made different through the process of experimentation and through variabilities, and the idea that that develops into something else that still has the essence of what it was at the beginning but is something new is obviously massively parallel.
And I think that's the same with animation as well. It's about sort of mutation and transformation, because the whole process is about that. When you start doing it, one thing becomes another. So I think they all sort of tie in really well together.
I think animation is really interesting as well for this project because it can be so abstract if we want it to be. It's not like filmmaking per se, which is you're still rooted in kind of what you can film realistically, or as in music, it's a representation of something else through an entirely different medium, which is really interesting.
Which also, and evolution is very flexible and very sort of plastic in that things change and things survive and things die, and you see it's very subtle shifts that happen over an extremely long period of time, but you can do that in animation, in drawing, much more easily than like if you were going to film it or describe it, because you can see something change from one thing to another, from I don't know, what are you going to draw? A dinosaur to a chicken.
To an octopus.
Oh no, octopuses are already split before you get to them.
You can't do that.
Come on, pay attention. Yeah. So what should I see?
Can I name more than one?
Of course you can.
I would go and I would definitely go and see Django Bates first of all, who's a pianist from this country who lives now in Denmark. But he writes in the most dense, incredibly impressive way, in that there's so much information, but the overall effect of it is so, that feeds into your subconscious, and then you just have this kind of incredibly bewildering, amazing experience, because it's so dense, but it's so, you can get into it so easily because it's so sort of musically and humanly done. So I'd go and see him, and I would go and see Pharoah Sanders, just because he's a living legend of jazz. And Stan Vesterhaus, he'd be the other person I'd go and see, just because it's unlike anything you would have ever heard.
Right.
Solo guitar, but from Norway, and totally bonkers.
Cool.